Hello and welcome. My name is Professor Graeme Roy from the University of Strathclyde. I'm delighted that I'm joined today by Professor Alan Felstead, Research Professor in the School of Social Sciences at the University of Cardiff. And this showcase video is to give you an insight into the work of the PrOPEL Hub and to provide a taster of the sessions within this year's ARC conference. We're going to be talking about home working, and we'll hear from Alan about his latest research and what it's telling us about the future of working at home post-pandemic. But before looking forward, Alan, you've been researching in this area for many years and more broadly looking at issues of good quality work and productivity. So if I could take you back to the pre-COVID period, what trends in working at home were you identifying?
Well, thank you very much, Graeme. I think that's an important question because it's important to set the recent phenomenal growth in home working in a historical context, so it can be fully appreciated and understood the scale of the change to the location of work that we're all witnessing and experiencing. First off, we must remember that in the Industrial Revolution split work from home, both in times of time and space. We all went out to work at a particular time. We worked in particular places outside of the office, such as factories, shops, and offices. So not surprisingly, back in the early 80s, working at home was a relative rarity. So only 1 to 2% of people worked mainly at home back then. And these home workers were very unlike the home workers of today. Most worked as out workers in, for example, the boot and shoe industry and the clothing trade. Nevertheless, the advent of technology, with the advent of technology and the mobile phone in particular, more and more work was detached from particular traditional places of work. And as a result, office workers spent more time away from the office. And we can see this in the figures, with mainly working at home rising to 5% in 2019, with a further 6% working at home at least 1 day a week. So the picture before COVID-19 was of slow growth and a change in the character of home workers, with more office workers in their ranks. We must also remember at this time, home working was seen as a perk, and legislation was introduced which allowed employees the right to request to work at home. So a very different context to the context of today. That's really interesting, Alan, and I think it's really important you frame it there as being what were the trends in before March. So if I could take you to what's happened since March. And you've published a really influential paper relatively recently looking at trends in shifting to working at home. Can you tell us a bit about what the key messages that are coming through that paper? Well, the key big message, of course, is that working at home rose dramatically and suddenly in lockdown, as we all know. But it shows it in the figures, basically. That's the important point. So the proportion saying that they worked exclusively at home rose from 6% immediately before the UK national lockdown to a phenomenal 43%. So it's from 6% to 43% in April 2020. And it continues to remain high by historical standards even today. The latest figures I have for September of this year suggest that the figure stood at 24%. So a very, very big and dramatic change in our working lives. A change that many people anticipated in the 1980s, I should say, but never came to pass. So we had a situation before COVID of evolution in the location of work, to a situation that we now stand today as revolution in where we work. Now, common fear among managers is that those working at home will not pull their weight, often referred to as a slacker's charter. After all, we must remember that the design of the factory and the office was all about surveillance. So that's where that comes from, that fear. With enforced home working because of COVID-19, what's the evidence? Well, around 70% said that when they worked at home, it had neither a detrimental effect on their productivity. I should say around 70% said that working at home had no effect on their productivity or even increased it. So this leaves around 30% saying that it had actually reduced the amount they got done per hour. Now, two of the most popular reasons given for increased productivity
were fewer interruptions from office noise and so forth, and the reduced need to commute. The reasons for reduced productivity were the lack of motivation, poor equipment, and being interrupted by the family. Now, here, two things I'd like to say. First, family interruptions are gendered, with women more likely to report them as the reason for their reduced productivity. So there's a gender story here. Secondly, the lack of motivation and poor equipment, often given as a reason for a decline in productivity, is something that management can address with better communication, regular meetings, and more investment in IT. Now, these findings from our work are echoed by those of others. And I'd just like to mention here Abigail Marks at Newcastle University and Jane Parry at the University of Southampton, who both have great websites supported by the ESRC that are well worth a visit. So it's worth taking a look at their work too, which echoes a lot of the findings of the work I'm reporting here. There are, of course, disadvantages of working at home. Home workers, for example, report working longer hours, so overwork. They find it difficult to remake the borders of home and work, which were previously made for them by the spatial separation of work and home. And this is reflected in home workers reporting lower levels of mental well-being, certainly in the first 2 months of the national lockdown, but not in the last month. Now, I think this suggests that maybe home workers have got more accustomed to working in this way after the initial sudden dramatic shock in April and May of this year. And again, this is something we'll all need to look at as researchers going forward to see whether this is sustained, this uplift in well-being is sustained. And I know this is on the agenda again of the Newcastle and Southampton team. So again, I urge you to have a look at that ESRC supported work.
Thank you. So we've covered a bit about the past and then the current. So if I could ask you to bring out your crystal ball, and a lot has been written in the press about a new normal for working at home, and the presumption that a lot more of us are going to be doing that on a more regular basis going forward. Do you share that view? And in what ways do you think the trends might go in the future?
Well, the short answer is I do share that view, but obviously it'll be a nuanced sharing of that view. A big finding of our research is that 9 out of 10 employees who worked at home during the lockdown, this is April, May and June of this year, would like to continue to work at home in some capacity. So that's a big proportion. 9 out of 10 have experienced it, have tasted the idea of working at home, and 9 out of 10 would like to do so in some shape or form. Around 1 in 2 employees want to work at home often or all of the time. And again, this is a big proportion. So it suggests there's a strong appetite from employees to continue working in this way. The findings also suggest that home working in the future is likely to boost rather than reduce productivity. So giving a kind of business case for carrying on working in this way. Why do I say this? Well, I say this because employees who felt more productive while they were working at home during the national lockdown were among the keenest to work at home when social distancing rules no longer apply. So going forward, letting those who want to work at home the ability to do so makes good business sense and may even increase productivity. So there isn't a reason for not allowing workers their choice. As a result, my expectation, as you asked, Graeme, is that the new normal will see more home working than in the past, most definitely. But I would anticipate a move to hybrid forms of home working, so with much more time spent working at home and far less in the office. The aim here would be to have the best of both worlds. So a bit of the office, but quite a lot of the home, where workers have found that they're more productive, they get interrupted less as a result, and there's a business case for carrying on in this way. So we've moved from a position of having to request to work at home, the right to request to work at home, to a situation where there's now a business case for that request to certainly be made.
Okay, and just one final question then. So you've mentioned investing in kit for working from home, and you've mentioned giving people flexibility to work from home. Are these the kind of key areas that you'd expect HR professionals and business leaders to be focusing upon in the future when they're thinking about the new normal in working at home?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, remember the dramatic change. Almost overnight, people were asked to leave their offices and work at home. And the figures are phenomenal. The figures I've said there, 6 to 43%. Even now it's 24%. These are very large numbers. Obviously, employers weren't kitted out to, didn't have the right kit. Often people didn't have the right kit to do it. So we've had to make do with what we've got. Now, going forward, we can't make do. There's got to be more long-term policies put in place. And this will shift employers and push employers to do so. They'll have to do so with more people wanting to work at home on a long-term basis. Remember, we're in emergency mode at the moment. I think that's the important thing to remember. This is an emergency, a health emergency, of course, and we're doing things differently because we have to. We've got no choice. But the long term, and I should say all the evidence I've shared with you so far is from an employee perspective. Surveys of employers also show the same thing, with a big appetite for big employers to continue working in this way. That needs to be followed up with investment in IT, so people have got the right kit to work at home, are supported in doing so, and don't report lack of motivation. And that's clearly a HR a thing that HR needs to deal with, along with kind of IT service professionals.
Yeah. It was absolutely fascinating, and I think there's so much research and interesting findings, I think, over the next few years as we start to see this shift to the new normal. So it'll be fascinating to watch your research and see the findings from what you come up with. And with that in mind, I'll just hand over to Meryl, who will give an overview about the work that PrOPEL is doing and the links into CIPD.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Graeme. Yes, so CIPD have a role within the PrOPEL project to help disseminate some of that research down into businesses large and small, but also to help take the results of that research and advise our members on policy, on look at our own standards to see where we can help develop qualifications or courses and training to help businesses manage people better that are at home, to support them better at home, and also to look at how we can influence policy where that needs to change, again, to encompass ensuring not just productive working, but that people are happy and well supported in their work at home in order for companies to thrive.
Thank you, Meryl, and thank you, Alan, for the fascinating insights about your research, and we look forward to seeing the future results of your endeavours in the months to come. Thank you.